Hello and welcome to another episode of the Blue is the New White podcast. Today, I sit down with someone who has spent his entire life doing a very unique trade. Joe Cadwell was a commercial diver for over 30 years. Growing up, he loved the sense of freedom that came with the underwater world, so in lieu of pursuing a typical college education, Joe enrolled in the U.S. Navy as a diver. After being one of only a handful of recruits who graduated, he continued his career as an instructor and eventually as a commercial diver in Sweden. His travels brought him back to the States, where he continued his career and ended up as the Apprentice Coordinator and Instructor for the Pacific Northwest Carpenters Institute, where he also serves as the Regional Counsil President of the Northwest Carpenters Union. Listen in for lessons today about tenacity, teamwork, critical thinking, perseverance, and my favorite, personal accountability, as told by someone who has spent many years developing those skills above and below sea level. This is already one of my favorite episodes, so sit back, turn it up, and learn how to use your hands, head, and your heart to become a master of your craft. As always, this show's not monetized and we don't run ads. We rely strictly on word of mouth from our listeners to grow the show. So if you enjoy this episode, please take a moment to rate it, review it, and share it. The future generations of trade people depend on it. They depend on you. So thanks again and enjoy this episode of the Blue is the New White podcast with Joe Cadwell. Joe, welcome to the Blue is the New White podcast. Happy to have you here today, man.
Well, thank you, Josh. It's a real pleasure to be on your show. I'm a fan, and thank you again for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to get into it and learn all about who you are and what you do. So for myself and for our audience, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, let us know who you are, where you come from, and maybe how you got to where you are today.
All right. Well, I'm actually calling in from Portland, Oregon. I am the Apprentice Coordinator / Instructor for the Pacific Northwest Carpenters Institute. We're the Regional Training Center in Southwest Washington and Oregon. I work with the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners in the Pacific Northwest Carpenters Union. I'm a former commercial diver. I worked 34 years as a commercial diver, 23 years of that in the Northwest with the union. And I'm also the Regional Counsil President of our Pacific Northwest Carpenters Union.
Wow. Impressive resume you got there, man. So tell me, why don't we go back a little bit further? Because I mean, just from the little bit that you said, I've got a million questions. But so let's go way back. I mean, how in the world did you get into the trades as a commercial diver?
Well, that's a great question, Josh. I actually was born in Massachusetts, and at the age of 10, moved out west, spent some time in Arizona where you are before my family moved to Southern California and then on up to Northern California. At the age of 12, I discovered scuba diving. My parents had recently divorced, and in order to try to find an outlet, I picked up diving. My neighbors were getting scuba certified, and I thought, man, what an amazing thing that was. I never even considered it. And at the age of 12, began diving. At the age of 16, the same neighbors had moved out to Florida, and I went out for the summer, spent a month with them in the Florida Keys, and that sealed the deal for me. I knew at that point in my life I was going to work in some way, shape, or form in, on, or around the water. And so I got back to Sacramento, where I was going to high school at that point. My dad knew that my grades probably weren't going to be good enough to get me into a college. It really wasn't an option, actually. I came from a military family. My dad was ex-military, Navy. His father was Navy. And so right after getting back from that trip, knowing that I wanted to make a career as a diver, he said, well, the Navy would be a great place for you to go, young man. And that's where I ended up going. Visited with the recruiter at the age of 17, and then 3 days after graduating high school, I was on delayed entry to go to boot camp in San Diego. Once I got out of boot camp, the goal at that time was to get to Navy dive school. We call it second class dive school. It's quite an arduous journey to get to the school, and then once you were there, it's extremely difficult to actually make it through the program. I went through Navy second class dive school, class 8525 to Charlie, which means I went to Pearl Harbor back in 1985, and I was the fifth class that year to graduate. And the class started with 30 applicants or recruits, and we graduated 7 out of that program.
Wow, you being one of the 7, huh?
That is correct. Once I left Navy dive school, I then took an assignment over in the East Coast again. I was stationed at the Amphib base, Little Creek in Virginia, and I was on a salvage ship. And during my time in the Navy as a second class diver, I made deployments down into the Caribbean and over into the Mediterranean. And I was also assigned as a search and rescue swimmer and for my ship. So it was a really, really a great opportunity to start off my diving career. I spent 4 years in the Navy, and when I got out at the old age of 22, the world was open for me. I had kind of knew that at that point I wanted to do something on my own. You know, I had 18 years of basically my folks or my dad telling me where to go, what to do, school. The Navy for sure gave you a sense of direction. After 4 years, I kind of wanted to go on a bit of a journey for myself, and I ended up buying a ticket down to the South Pacific. And during that time, I actually became a recreational diving instructor for the Professional Association of Diving Instructors, PADI, and began teaching for the next 7 years all throughout the South Pacific and in a few years in Mexico, in the Yucatan Peninsula, basically working as a dive bum, so to speak. So I had a really great tan, thousands and thousands of hours underwater, and very little to show for it. Diving doesn't pay really well on the recreational end of things.
That is amazing. And I'm gonna cut you off there real quick. I want to hear how that ends and how you actually got into the trades doing that as commercial diving. But before we get there, I'm curious, what was it about diving that you loved so much? I mean, clearly it was all you did. I mean, from what you're explaining to me here, it seems like a big portion of what you did from age 12 to, I mean, 7 years after you got out of the Navy at 22, so 29, and that's where we're at in your story so far. So I know that there's more experience to come, but what was it that kept you so intrigued about diving?
Well, to be honest, I think it was really the excitement, the adventure. The diving is a beautiful world. The underwater world can be beautiful and all in its own. When you're working in the South Pacific, obviously you have unlimited visibility. The marine environment is just alive. It's amazing how much is going on. You take a walk in an average forest, you'll be lucky if you see a deer or maybe a squirrel, hear some birds off in the distance. But as soon as you get in on a tropical reef, everything is moving, and everything is very dynamic, and you see the struggles of life play out. It's fish are out; they're always hungry, and there's just a ton of things going on. I like the adventure, the travel, the freedom that diving brought, the physical challenge of it, the mental acuity that needs to actually be a successful diver. And my definition of a successful diver is to have as many ascents as you do descents. So it's an important concept to keep in mind. And it offered me an outlet that I felt very comfortable expressing myself both physically and mentally.
That's great reason. A lot of great reasons. The underwater world just absolutely it fascinates me. It does. I'm big into that. I mean, ever since I was a kid, you hear about the stories of sunken ships and buried treasure and all that, and it's it really is just fascinating, especially in the way that you just put it with kind of being able to be involved in this whole ecosystem that's almost invisible to the rest of the world. You know what I mean? All we look out and all we see is the top of the ocean, and there's just so much underneath that. I mean, we haven't even explored yet. So, really, really exciting, and I think that's an awesome reason for wanting to do it. I'm curious. So you said there were in your where was it? In your Navy experience, there were 30 recruits, 7 of whom graduated, you being one of them. What do you attribute to you being one of the 7?
I would say, I had a really good background in the water to begin with. Obviously, Navy diving is they're going to test you in the water, and because I had prior experience starting basically at the age of 12 and spent at that time probably just a few hundred hours in the water. At least I had that above the average recruit going through there. The tenacity that I but no, or I can't was never an option for me going through that school, no matter what challenge they threw at you. Initially, when you go to Navy dive school, they weed out the initial group physically. The physicality of the training is nonstop and it's ruthless. And they try to break and wash out as many people as quickly as possible. At that point, you got a bunch of pretty physically fit people, and then they start throwing some pretty hardcore academics your way and looking for people that can actually have critical thinking and the ability to adapt to various situations, both academically and mechanically while at work. So the physical nature, the mental nature, and then a week 5 is what we call Hell Week at dive school, and that's where again so many people, strong, smart recruits, get in the water and just can't function. When you're being tested like that. They put you in a pool with a set of steel 72s on your back and a single hose regulator, and you swim circles on the bottom of the pool, and on the stenciled on the back of your tanks are a number. And the dive school instructors sort of hover above you on snorkeling gear, and they'll just dive bomb you and your partner. And they'll first thing that comes off is always the mask. And then the regulator gets ripped out of your mouth, and it's usually jammed between the 2 steel 72s. They'll undo all the straps. They'll take off your fins. It's sort of like a mini tornado hitting you. Your partner, meanwhile, is just there as a safety observer at that point in case you really start to lose it. And then all of a sudden that storm goes away and it's quiet, and then you have the time to put yourself back together. And that calm, that ease, that knowing that you're going to be able to get yourself out of whatever predicament they put you in that particular instance, you are going to get through it. And that ultimately is what washed a lot of people out. Again, it's very just it's an environment that's not conducive to your health and well-being, and a lot of people, it sits in the back of their head, and if they can't overcome that sense of fear or paranoia, then it can be the end of you. And fortunately, I was one of 7 that made it through that, and that background that I picked up in the military definitely helped me survive a lot of hairy situations that I think we'll talk about a little bit later as my career as a commercial diver began.
Yeah, absolutely. 30s. And that kind of is a good segue to my final question before we move on to commercial diving. But what do you think is the biggest lesson you took away from that, if you could pick one?
Teamwork and camaraderie. Obviously, no one is going to make it through that school on their own. We really do. The military really does want to break down individuals to build teams. The sense of camaraderie, the sense of esprit de corps that is needed to be a successful diver in the military, whether it's the spec ops, the special forces, the salvage divers, the ship's husbandry divers. It's really is based on teamwork. And knowing that you had, in this case, brothers in arms that were there, that you had their back, they had your back, and you knew as a unit, as a team, even as our numbers whittled down to the very end. I remember we almost got within 3 weeks of graduating 9, and then the final washout phase occurred when people started to feel a little too full of themselves, to be honest, and they would get in altercations down in Waikiki with the Marines. And then you're washed out because of disciplinary. So again, initially physical washout, and then the mental testing, and then the adeptness in the water. But eventually they build you up to a point where you kind of think you're invincible, and you realize that, yeah, you're really not. And, you need as much discipline on the job as you do off the job to be successful. So.
Wow. That's amazing. And, it's funny hearing you say a lot of that stuff, because number one, I'm a big advocate for the military. Thank you for your service, by the way. And I'm a big advocate for the military being a great segue into the trades, just because of all the similarities and lessons and the takeaways, the fundamentals that you learn while you're there. I mean, even the ones that you said: tenacity, teamwork, critical thinking, perseverance. I mean, all of these things are, I think I list almost all of those in my book when I talk about the skilled trades, and not only what makes a good skilled trades person, but also what the skilled trades in general teach. So again, I think that this is a great segue to get back to your story of how you got into commercial diving. So we last left off that you were a diving instructor for 7 years. How did that then transition into commercial diving?
Well, my wife typically doesn't like this part of my history telling, but along the way, when I was working in Thailand, I met someone from Sweden, and she was a dive instructor as well. We spent 2 years teaching diving together in Mexico, and then at some point, she wanted to move back to her home country of Sweden. So, doing what any young man would do, I ended up moving to Sweden with her, and at that point, I knew that I was no longer going to make it as a recreational dive instructor. I didn't know the language. It's a very large country geographically, but population-wise, very small. I lived in the central part of the country on the coast, but a very small opportunity to actually apply my trade of teaching diving. Fortunately for me, there was a small diving company in the town of Hudiksvall, where I lived, about 4 hours north of Stockholm. And this commercial diving firm that took it upon, allowed me to work with them. In order to be able to work for Hubinets Dykeri or Hubinets Diving Service, I had to qualify through the Swedish government's certification program. And 10 years after basically graduating from Navy Dive School, I found myself back going to dive school in order to meet the accepted commercial diving criteria. So I ended up flying back to Houston, Texas, went to the Ocean Corporation in 1995 to basically blast through their class, where we started 30 students. We graduated 30 students. No disrespect to any of the commercial diving programs out there, but yeah, they're not in the business of washing people out. And I took my education, the fresh stamp of certification, back to Sweden. I ended up starting commercial diving as a full-time career in 1995.
Awesome. And for those that don't know out there, can you explain what commercial diving is?
Yes, I can. Commercial diving is basically you're doing the work that is above water, below water, whether it's constructing the foundations for bridges, whether it's working on hydroelectric facilities, dams, salvaging boats, salvaging trains, salvaging planes. We typically, as commercial divers, don't get involved with the car type thing. That's more of your police and fire rescue groups, or some of the smaller commercial diving firms. As a active working commercial diver, hard hat diver, I tended to find myself more on large scale infrastructure projects. We do a lot of burning underwater. Contrary to popular belief, we don't do a whole lot of welding. Welding is an art all of it in its own, and the majority of things that are welded underwater are, for lack of a better word, temporary. You will put anodes, sacrificial anodes, on sheet pile, on round pile. Maybe you'll do some work on the bottom of a vessel for a temporary repair until it can get into dry dock. But the majority of welding are welded objects that we install underwater are welded topside, powder coated, sent down to us, and we bolt them together. We hydraulic, flange them up and bolt them together. So there's not this sort of glorified or romanticized picture of a commercial diver welding hours away underwater. It really is a fallacy. It's not really factual to assume that coming into that trade, you're going to be doing a lot of underwater welding. Now, the people that can weld and they find those specialty niches, yeah, they do quite well. But for the rest of us, myself included, I can stick metal together underwater. But would I ever consider myself a truly proficient underwater welder? No. I can sketch on a pad. I won't call myself Rembrandt.
No, and it's funny when you say that primarily, you bolt things together. I immediately picture that scene from Men of Honor with Cuba Gooding Jr., where they cut the bag and he's got to put the pipe together underwater. I don't know why. That's just how my brain works.
And
But
that's pretty much close to the truth. A lot of times you'll get things sent down to you like Cuba Gooding had to deal with in that movie that you're like, how did this ever come down to me? Or maybe you drop your bolt bag and everything ends up on the bottom and you're working in zero visibility conditions more often than not, or at least, limited visibility. And it is a challenge. Each and everything you do, you can kind of expect to spend a lot more time underwater doing these tasks than you would above water, for sure.
yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious. I just have to ask: did you ever find anything underwater that was just super cool? I mean, did you ever just make a discovery and you were like, "Oh, this is so cool"?
Gold doubloons, no. I found a 44 Magnum one time, just under the silt layer, which was an interesting find, just swimming along. That was a recreational dive. I've been on a salvage job off the northern coast of California. I actually didn't make the dive on that one. It was a saturation dive. We were diving on a shipwreck from 1865 called the Brother Jonathan. And I was part of the surface support crew for the divers that lived under pressure for, I think they were down for almost 40 days. And we were looking for gold doubloons and some of the first paper money to be circulated in the United States. It was actually on its way to Fort Vancouver. It had been printed in San Francisco, and the wreck of the Brother Jonathan went down in 1865 off the coast. I believe it was Eureka, where we were working just offshore, maybe a mile and a half offshore, and approximately I think it was 165, 170 feet of water.
That's literally the dream. That's I mean, exploring a shipwreck from 1865. That is unbelievable.
Those jobs are few and far between, though, Josh.
I'm sure, but they are fascinating, and they make for a good story to tell, don't they?
Sure.
So I'm curious. Then you started your commercial diving career in Sweden, and so where did that take you? I mean, where did you end up?
Well, basically in Sweden, I stayed in Sweden. The company I was working for was Ole Hubinet was the specialist for bridge inspections throughout the country of Sweden. He had a particular certification that was needed, and we would run a 3-man crew. And I got to see a tremendous amount of the country. Just getting there, not knowing the language, it was really an interesting way to get to explore a lot of the country and see different parts that I probably would have never seen. I spent approximately 4 years in Sweden, and when I left the country, I had the promise to be on a job. I'd actually gone and applied for a commercial diving company at the south of Sweden in the city of Malmö, and they were building a bridge tunnel between Malmö, Sweden, and Copenhagen, Denmark, and that bridge has since been completed. I was offered the job, but with the caveat that there would be about a 4 to 5 month delay between me taking the job and the actual project kicking off. During that period of time, I had been out of the U.S. for 6 years, 2 years in Mexico and 4 years in Sweden. I thought, aside from a short stint going to Texas for dive school, I thought it would be a good time to come back and reconnect with friends and family, and before making the big jump across the pond. I actually had at that point residency for the country of Sweden. I came back, and in short order, I met my wife, who we've now been married for 21 years, but we've been together for 23 years roughly when I came over. So the girlfriend in Sweden stayed in Sweden. I ended up moving to back to the States and meeting my wife, and then picking up my job here in the Northwest as a full-time commercial diver with the union.
Okay, wow, quite the journey, and it's such an awesome story that you have. And I know we're not done yet. I still have more questions for you, so don't think we're done. But it's one of those things. I often tell people, because when I say skilled trades, people's minds go to the usual, right? Electrician, plumber, technician, carpenter, all of these things that are top of mind. And what I try to get people to realize is the amount of skilled trades careers that actually exist in the industry is phenomenal. I mean, commercial diver, I'd be willing to bet that most people don't know a commercial diver exists. Once you explain it, then it's like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. But it's not something that people just think of off the top of their head, and so I find that really, really fascinating, especially with kind of where it's taken you, and that's another thing that I often say is, with the skilled trades, there's, depending on what trade you get involved in, there's so much travel. If you want to see the world, there are trades that can facilitate that for you, and depending on what company you end up with, or what trajectory you're looking to follow within that trade, but it's more than possible, and you're a perfect example of that.
Yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of places. Once I picked up the occupation here in the Northwest. I stayed primarily in the Northwest, but I did have a good chance to travel across the U.S. all the way over to Boston for work. I've spent time down in the South Indian Ocean, military base down there as a civilian commercial diver working on Diego Garcia. Spent time in Malaysia and in the country of Burma, doing a salvage job on the Rangoon River back some 15 years ago. So yeah, the world definitely began to open up even more once I moved here to the Northwest and made it my home base.
That's amazing. So when you are sent to these places, how long are you typically gone? How often does that vary?
Well, that's a great question, and the old standard is if they say it's going to be a 2-week job, plan on 2 months plus, and if they say it's going to be a 2-year job, plan on about 3 days. So it's hard to say. Yeah, it's a very dynamic work scope, and so much of it is dependent on the water conditions, the weather conditions, the orchestration of other components of the project. You never really have a clear, true understanding of what you're getting into until you're actually on the job. So something as simple as going out to salvage a train car that goes off the rails in a shallow river in Montana, you think you could do that, in the dry without the water component in probably 5 to 6 days. It could take a dive crew 3 months to accomplish that, just because of how fast the water is running, how deep the water is, the logistics of getting cranes there, environmental impact on the area. There's so many variables, so you never quite really know until you're on the job and start sussing it out.
Wow. Yeah, no, those are definitely factors that I hadn't thought about before. But it makes a ton of sense when you explain it that way. I asked you what the biggest lesson that you learned when you were in the Navy, going through that training. I'm curious about the lessons that you've learned through your travels as a commercial diver. Anything stand out?
Yeah, personal accountability, I think, Josh, is probably the first one. You have to be a responsible professional to actually make it in diving, or I would think any trade. People want employees that are going to be on time every day. People are going to want workers that have a good attitude, that are willing to learn, that can get along with other people on the job site. It's really important to find yourself sort of adopting a chameleon sort of a mentality in order to remain successful, because there are so many challenges of the work, and then you start throwing in different type of personalities as well. So it's really important, I think, to again have that personal accountability. In my craft, it was very important to keep physicality on the forefront. It's a very physical, arduous job, and you can get away with a lot of things in your 20s and 30s and even early 40s. I retired at the age of 53 from commercial diving, and I was still able to hold my own because of my attitude towards fitness and just sort of good, healthy lifestyle choices. And I was getting kind of on the upper edge of actual people that still do the craft. And fortunately for me, I was able to call the shots and actually retire when I wanted to from the trade, and move my my experience and my passion for teaching over to the apprenticeship program, and continue on as contributing to the union, but in a different scope altogether.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that in a minute. I got to say, The answer of personal accountability is I absolutely love that. Those that know me well know that I'm a big advocate of personal responsibility and personal accountability. And I don't know what it is. I mean, I know part of it is the way that I was raised. My dad's very old school, and he made sure to instill that in me in a young age. Or I also don't know is if I look around today, and I'm not going to take anything away from any generations that exist out there, because I think that there's a lot of stereotypes thrown around that maybe aren't incredibly accurate. But I do think that in this day and age, we do seem to have a personal responsibility issue in a lot of ways. And of course, I'm not talking about everybody, but I look around, and it's the little things. You mentioned being on time. That's one of the smallest, easiest things that you can do to hold yourself personally accountable. And I don't know, especially in what I do, I've seen not the opposite, but just not as much of a commitment to it. Is that something that you're seeing too?
Yeah, I would say in my time in the field, I'm going to say no, because we were such a tight knit group of commercial divers in the Northwest. It's very difficult to make your name in the commercial diving industry as a union diver here in the Northwest. There's not a lot of turnover, so the people that do actually turn it into a full time career are fairly responsible to begin with. They do have all those attributes that we talked about. And that's why they're on that job, and that's why they're in that role or that position. As an apprentice coordinator with the union now, it's one of the things that we are really trying to instill upon our members. I mean, skillcraft is very, very important, but we have to instill upon our apprentices that, again, the personal accountability and the fact that you truly are an independent contractor. Even though you are in an organized labor union, each and every day you go to work, you're representing not only your employer and the union, but you're representing yourself, and that's truly what keeps you on the job. Your attitude and your ability to put 110% out each and every day is what ensures your place on that crew. And if you can't cut the mustard, there are plenty of people looking for these good paying jobs with benefits and access to training and pension and safer working conditions and representation lined up. And so you are responsible for yourself, and if you have a family, for your family's needs, by being a strong worker, bringing to every day to the job a great attitude and a willingness to get along and get the job done.
Yeah, no, that's such a great answer, and that's kind of what I was alluding to also when you said you're representing yourself. There's so much to say about that. In the industry, you really are. You're not only representing a company, you're not only representing your teammates, but you are also creating an image for yourself that you're going to have to carry with you throughout your entire career. Which I think is why personal accountability is so important, especially in the skilled trades. And another reason why the skilled trades are great at teaching it, right? Because, when you're out there doing things, and you're assigned a task, you're building something, you're fixing something, it's your two hands on whatever that task is. And so there's not a whole lot of, you can't get around it. You know what I mean? You either do well or you don't. And when you don't, you have no choice really but to accept responsibility. Then your job becomes to learn from it.
That is for sure. And like you say, having your hands on the work is super important. We really try to instill into our apprentices to also put your head into the work as well. And then you really begin to hit a craftsman level of proficiency when you begin to put your heart into your work. And when you get all three of those, your head, your hands, and your heart involved, yeah, the sky's the limit. You can start calling your own shots, and it's really a wonderful thing to reach that level. But you got to start somewhere, and that's usually with your hands and just trying to figure out your place in the market.
That's awesome. I think I just found my clip for your show. Head, hands, and heart. I love that. No, that's fantastic. So we're gonna pick up a little bit at where we left off. You said you retired from commercial diving at at 53. What happened next? How did you get into this other area of the union?
So, yeah, I was on a really awesome run. The last 4 years of my career, I spent an inordinate amount of time on the road. I mean, commercial diving, I traveled a lot, but the last 4 years, I literally spent over 3 years away from my home, which meant sleeping in hotels all around the Northwest. And so after that 4 year run, I got home, and my wife, who's a very patient woman for sure, said, why don't you try to find something a little bit closer to home, and we'll get to reconnect a bit. And I thought, what a great idea. And fortunately, the regional council, or the regional training center for our council, is about 9 miles from my house, the Pacific Northwest Carpenters Institute. And I knew there was a need to develop an apprenticeship program, or apprenticeship component for the commercial divers in our pile driving program. So we don't teach people to commercial dive in the union. We actually take folks that have been through an accredited commercial diving school and enroll them into our pile driving program, which is part of our same local, the Pile Drivers and Divers, Local 196. And there was no curriculum, though. There was no designated pathway for people coming out of commercial diving school to come into our union as an apprentice. They either came into our local as a journey level worker, or they came in as a pile driver apprentice with nothing directly designed for them to continue their commercial diving education. So I was asked to help design a component for these people. And it turned out to be an awesome opportunity for me. It led the pathway. The training center said, "Hey, Joe's, we kind of like how you put together this apprenticeship program. Would you be interested in teaching some of the other components of our apprenticeship to our apprentices?" And I said, "That would be great, but you have to understand, I haven't hung a lot of drywall in my career. Drywall just kind of gets wet and blows away in the water. I haven't done a lot of stick framing. I don't know a lot about metal framing. I couldn't build scaffold to save my life unless it was underwater, and I had a set of plans. So I have a limited skill set." And they said, "That's fine. We're going to find the right place for you." And I actually began teaching the introductory to intro class at our training center, which deals a lot with equipment certifications, the industrial forklifts, the rough terrain forklifts, the scissor lifts, the aerial boom lifts, and then sort of an overall broad strokes introduction for these new apprentices into our program. It's a 4-day class, 10 hours a day. And so that went really well. The staff at the upper management staff at the training center said, "We like what you're doing there. Would you be interested in perhaps getting trained to be able to teach OSHA 30, construction math and blueprint reading," and all these things, sort of fell into my wheelhouse. After about a year there, they then said, we have this position opening up. It's for a coordinator / hybrid instructor. So I actually have 2 roles now. I teach part-time, and I'm a full-time coordinator, and I oversee the academic progression for about 300 apprentices at the training center.
Wow. I got to ask, because this is something I love to get to, when you reach a point in your career when you can take the knowledge that you've accumulated, over the years and help to transfer that to other individuals, who hopefully can be as good or better than you are or were, what kind of satisfaction do you get from that?
It's huge. I tell you, to be able to have the ability to positively affect people's lives is so rewarding. I talked about teamwork early on with the in the military. We definitely had a sense of camaraderie in the commercial diving field as a union diver, but it was somewhat insular. You work with those crews, you move on, and again, you're just always kind of representing yourself or your best interest, the best interest of your family. At this point in my career, I can truly say I'm turning around my years of experience and helping people be the best that they can be, and I find it just immensely satisfying. Sometimes frustrating, I'll be honest with you, trying to show people what I believe is to be the right path, the right decision. But ultimately, people have to make their own decisions and determine what's important in their lives. But for the folks that I truly feel like I'm connecting with and showing the the attributes of organized labor and skill craft and positive attitude is really, really rewarding for me.
Yeah, I'll bet. And that's often what I find too. I ask um, a lot of people about, the rewards of the skilled trades. And, I get the response of helping people so often, and it's funny because it can be in the beginning of their career, it can be at the end of their career, it could be all throughout, but that's something that I found that remains consistent for a lot of people that I talk to, is that, the skilled trades give them an opportunity to help people, whether that's the people they're servicing or whether that's the people they're teaching or training, or even just their employers, and they're helping grow a business. And, there's so many different ways you can say it, but so it's interesting to hear you say that, because I think that there is a lot of value in that and what you do. And uh we that's what we need, for the skilled trades as a whole, not just for commercial diving, not just for any of the other courses that you teach, but the skilled trades as a whole. you know People being willing to transfer their knowledge to those who want to learn, and really making it apparent why they should want to learn it.
Yeah, exactly. We have a saying in the education business and in the regional council that does representation for our members that, at some point when you move over to these other positions, you are no longer building the infrastructure. You're no longer building buildings. You're building people, and that's truly what our aim is to provide a pathway for a better life, middle class working Americans.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm gonna ask you one more question. This is something I ask everybody. We talk a lot on this show about success and how people have found success in the skilled trades and what they do, and no matter how you define it, skilled trades can be a very, very great way to achieve it. So I'm curious, for you personally, how do you define success, and how has your career enabled that for you?
I I really, really appreciated in my time as a commercial diver the ability to basically determine when and where I wanted to work, to have that autonomy, to be able to know that, yeah, I've worked really, really hard. I'm now going to take some time off with my wife. We're going to travel. Both of us love to travel. At this point, I think I myself have visited over 54 countries around the world, and I've lived overseas for 10 years. I really like the financial stability that the union structure provides. Again, the livable wages and the access to benefits, not just for myself, medical benefits and dental and vision, not just for myself, but for my wife. Just that freedom to me is sort of my definition of success. Knowing that I want to go to work and not that I have to go to work at this point in the game. I'm close to a retirement age, even though it's not on my radar to do so. I have at age 57 the ability to actually start drawing a pension from the union. I plan on working well past that, but knowing that I have that financial freedom and security is sort of my definition of success.
That's a great answer, and I hope everybody out there is listening, because that could be you. Joe, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the time that you spent with me today. You have a podcast. Why don't you go ahead and let people know about the podcast and anywhere else that they can find you?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for asking about the podcast or mentioning the podcast, Josh. Yeah, about 2.5 months ago, I was reelected to the position of Regional Counsil President for the Pacific Northwest Carpenters Union. We're a 6-state regional council, part of the United Brotherhood of Carpenters. And our 6 states are Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and Alaska. We cover about 1.1 million square miles. We have 29,000 carpenters actively working in about 7 different craft. And as the Regional Counsil President, newly reelected to a 4-year term back in August, I wanted to do something to reach out and sort of expand the role of president. For the first 2 years that I was the president, I kind of came in halfway through another person's term. I was learning the ropes. I was learning what it meant to run a monthly regional council meeting or a quarterly delegate meeting. when we have our delegate meetings, it's 165 people in a delegates in a room, and I orchestrate that meeting. I facilitate the conversation and the dialogue that is designed to better our members' lives. It was a huge leap for me, stepping up onto the big stage, stepping up in front of a podium. Fortunately, I had a lot of experience with public speaking prior to that, and I continued to work on that even till today. And it helped me have the confidence to be able to lead this organization. So, getting back to your question, or to your earlier thought there, Josh, in August, I said, how can I affect and better the lives of our 29,000 members? It's COVID now. Travel is difficult. I'm not going to make it to all our different locals throughout our 1.1 million square miles. Let's start a podcast. And I clearly remember the day I was in my backyard, sunny backyard. On a Sunday, I looked over at my wife and I told her, and she just shook her head like she normally does when I come up with some of these ideas. And I took a deep dive into it. I had never done podcasting before.
No pun intended.
Right. That is correct. The podcast is called Grit Northwest. It's abbreviated Grit NW. And you can find Grit Northwest, which comes out approximately twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. I drop smaller episodes. Sometimes they're as short as 5 minutes. And then one of my longer length interviews can be up to 35 minutes. And Grit Northwest is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Amazon Music, TuneIn. It's also available online if you go to buildnw.org/podcast, and you can get exposed to what Grit is. And Grit isn't specific just to the members in the Northwest. I've got listeners all across the U.S. now, and which really blows me away for something that's really only been around for a few months. And I try to bring in subject matter experts or personalities of interest to interview. It's an interview-based podcast, much like yours is, Josh. And we talk about everything from growth mindset and leadership to politics, to one of the darker sides of our industry, the construction industry, the high rate of suicide and mental illness. I brought on subject matter experts about that. We talk about personal finance management from the apprentice phase all the way up to the retiree, and really just trying to add a variety of content and information for our listeners. And it seems to be really well received at this point. So again, Grit NW if you're looking for it on your smart device.
Awesome. And I will definitely be adding that to my listening list. Joe, thank you. And yeah, I mean, just again, thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing your story, and for everything that you do for the trades and the people in it.
All right. Thank you, Josh. I look forward to having you on Grit Northwest one of these days as well.
I'd be happy to. Thanks, Joe.